Good afternoon and welcome to yet another exciting Mail and Guardian webinar. I am Anati Madubela. Today's webinar is hosted together with the South African partners, the Dutch Embassy and the Consulate General, who ventured into the space of identity issues with the hashtag Co-Create Identity Experience in Cape Town between the 4th and 6th of June. The program was used as a way to open meaningful dialogues around questions of identity and transformation in the context of the country's shared cultural heritage, including Dutch historic ties through trade and slavery. These conversations took place through cultural, scientific, social, artistic, South African initiatives and collaborations between South African and Dutch artists. The program included a curated tour of the Slave Lodge, a showing of Kratoa Eva van der Kaap, and a display at Kamisa Music, amongst other fun and educational initiatives, which try to bring back voices from the past, considering the present while looking to the future. Today's webinar is under the theme, Looking Beyond Diversity to Belonging. We will take this opportunity to look to the future and discuss how we can make the transition from diversity to inclusion. How do we ensure that individuals feel welcome and seen in a space that is often hostile to them? How do we foster a sense of belonging? Allow me to welcome our guests for this afternoon. Marlene le Roux is the Chief Executive of Artscape Theatre. She's a disability and women's rights activist, as well as the co-founder of Women's Achievement Network for Disability. Arthur Kibbelaar is a strategic advisor for diversity and inclusion in the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Quintin Goliath is a hip-hop artist, poet, storyteller, who uses poetry, theatre, and music as creative platforms to celebrate his heritage and culture. Now, before our speakers introduce themselves, I'd just like to ask the audience to pop in questions in the chat box, and please just say who you are directing the questions to. And do not forget to follow the conversation on Instagram and Twitter at co-create SANL. Now, I'd like to ask the panelists to just introduce themselves briefly, your work, and how you were involved in the hashtag Co-Create Identity Experience. Marlene, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you so much for this conversation, which is so needed. First of all, I want to say I'm also from the rural areas, which is very important for me to mention. It is not just an urban conversation. And most of the time, rural area people are not part of the conversation. I'm part of the Co-Create Identity program, which is a journey. I'll say we are all on a journey of looking at humanity. I see myself more as a facilitator of bringing people together, but also to share my story of coming from a rural town, coming and working and grew up very poor. I'm also a survivor of apartheid, and I'm a proud woman with a disability, and I'm a woman of color. And I'm also, if you look at my age, I'm 55, and in a category that lived life in apartheid segregation with so many DNA that needs to describe me. So it's the complexity of identity, but also to look at the future as per se.
Thank you. And Arthur, would you please also just give a brief bio of yourself and your work and how you were involved in the experience?
Good afternoon, Anati, and good afternoon, Quintin and Marlene. I think it's an extreme high honor for me to participate in this conversation. I flew in, I was invited from the Consul General to participate in conversations that I think are the essence of what we're dealing with, not only in South Africa, but also in the Netherlands. Diversity, and I would like to include equity, is, I think, at the heart of what society now has to deal with. For me, coming to South Africa from 95 onwards, I have learned so much from your struggle against apartheid, from your way of building democracy, of dealing with the past, and also looking to the future. So I come here to listen, and I also come to participate into a conversation that actually, I think, deals with all of us. Broken and healing the future is upon all of us to make an inclusive society. And as part of the delegation, it was an honor for me to listen in, to see how South Africa is shaping its future, dealing with these questions of diversity, but also bringing back to the Netherlands insights and valuable conversations like this. So I see this as a process, like Marlene is saying, and I see this as a collaboration for many years to come. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Quintin, the floor is yours. Tell us a bit more about yourself, your work, and how you sort of like interacted with the experience.
Thank you so much. My name is Quintin Goliath, but I'm also known as Tsatsvanger, a established rapper and keen collaborator with whether we talking about local, the local platforms as well as international. I do reflect a lot of Arthur and Marlene's points in terms of an inclusive society, looking at equity, because I have been dealing with this unspoken part of our heritage, especially coming from Cape Town. Right? I'm born in Mitchell's Plain, and there's a lot of our shared history that's not really investigated, which made me culturally very curious about the rest of the world, and I started traveling through my music. And that's how I started sharing platforms with artists from the Netherlands. And Co-Create has recognized me as an, I suppose, quality export and candidate to be a voice, you know, for such a very, I think, imperative theme called experience identity. Because for me, identity is constantly changing. And to notice these changes through the past, you know, being present always, and then looking to the future to see what identity will look like, you know, and speaking towards that. Yes. Thank you.
Quintin, I think I'd just like you to sort of like expand on what you just said, right? And it's very profound that identity is consistently changing. And I want to know, you know, why is identity such an important topic?
Thank you. During a talk that Linda Mbeki had during the Co-Create program, I came in late, and and I don't want Arthur to say anything about this because that's how we met. And I asked her what does she think about the importance of language when redefining one's identity. You know, there's always this redefinition once you get to know a bit more about yourself through your culture and heritage, you know, and history. And then when she became very personal with her response, and she said, whilst doing her PhD in Amsterdam, she started becoming homesick, and she felt like she had to call home because it reminded her of home when she spoke to her mother in her mother tongue, you know. And it also, she reflected that it's not just a reminder of home, but the ability to formulate one's own opinion.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty much in there between having a voice, but speaking on platforms, whether it's on academia, the economy, you know, and just social commentary in general, instead of choosing a voice that will make you feel like you intellectually acceptable. So yeah, that for me is quite very important, and I thank Lindy Mbeki for that.
Wow, that's amazing. But I also want to pass the question on to you, Marlene. You know, why is identity such an important topic? One that we should, you know, sort of like have a webinar on.
I think important is about equity and equality. It's important that we need to frame this in a way of, if my identity, which we were always defined by the color of our skin and our enslaved history, it's also poverty as per se. And These are that we can't diverse and we can't not speak about poverty, joblessness, disempowerment of women, disempowerment of gender-based violence without that particular aspects, and then speak about identity. Because identity is interlinked with social issues as well. If we're only concentrating on identity and think that identity is going to give us the new way of empowerment, then we're going to lose it. Or that's why I bring in the rural aspect as well. I'm very privileged as I'm sitting here, because I've worked with Jits Finger as well, and I work with artists because I work with the Volks Opera's bringing Kretua to Artscape as a production. But it's also Eva van die Kaap, which is a different name as well. But it's also to tell young people of this generation what was happening in the past in order for us to look in the future. But we can't forget that what do we have now in the world that we are? Where are we in South Africa? If we talk about co-create identity, it is also about where we are in South Africa. We have 11 languages, and the 12th language is now sign language as well. Do we meet? Are we in a euphoria, but we don't tackle the real issues on the ground? If we over-concentrate on identity and not looking at resources with equity and equality, then we're going to have a huge challenge with young people that is without education and skills development. So we need to frame this in a way of the empowerment, that this conversations doesn't become elitism and doesn't become a class issue once again.
I think you're right. This conversation shouldn't be elitist. But one thing that you said that I think I want to ask or pass on to Arthur rather is that Marlene, you said identity is interlinked with social issues, right? And Arthur, I'd like you to explain what is the link between identity, diversity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Anati. And I agree with Quintin and with Marlene that identity is so important. Why? For two reasons. I come from the Caribbean. I was born in Curaçao, in the Caribbean, which is still part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And I have seen that identity is important for the future of your country. Who are you? How have you been? The past influences the present. There is a need for people to know who they are in order to advance. And I just had a conversation with a friend, and he said, we need to focus on economic, we need to focus on education. And I have lived in many countries, and every country that denied the people's identity could not prosper. I believe firmly that any country, and whatever the state of the country, has to have a healthy identity, collective identity. So it is not an elitist project to talk about culture and to talk about academic research. It is the heart of your interhuman relationships in a society. I would go so far that conflict, war, is often originates from people's denying people's right of identity. So it is a very crucial thing for every society to provide, to facilitate that identity, like Quintin said, to prosper. And it is changing, but you have to pay respect. Any country that I have lived in, which had not a healthy way of dealing with its identity, had to deal with conflict. And I think conflict also denies people the way to prosper their lives. So it's personal. Yes, it is me as an individual, but it is also a collective duty, because if people don't feel acknowledged, and that is what identity is. It is acknowledge either your heritage, the culture that you are part of, the expressions that you want. And I think that's my last point. Artists and culture usually are the best spaces to foster that identity. And that is why I think writers, musicians, and actors and plays can provide us that space in order to make our identity that sometimes is broken, heal that and transform that in a society. So there is a very direct link to a healthy society and healthy identities, Anati.
I agree. And Quintin, I saw you sort of like nodding your head yes there when Arthur spoke about artists, and the role that artists sort of like play in diversity, identity, and inclusion broader. So I think I want to ask you, what is the role of arts and culture in creating diversity and inclusion?
Thank you so much. And thank you, Arthur and Marlene, for those statements and those thoughts. And I would love to see that being practiced, becoming a reality, because collective consciousness, in my experience, is why art is so important, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and also looking at identity in the future. I went to Taiwan in 2007, thanks to a collaboration with Jethro Lowe, also known as Tanaman Kam. And he shared with me my ancestral roots, of which I've had very little knowledge about, and the importance thereof, which made me see things differently, which is something I want to talk about right now, especially through the art, because it's a two-way thing when art reflects society, because it's a responsibility for me as an artist to always show that, but to be very uninfluenced by the politics of the day, from the status quo and society itself, to be able to criticize and be innovative at that, as an artist. Because I didn't understand a word that I read in Taiwan for obvious reasons. My education was very limited, but the way, the harmony in the society was something of beauty that I can't put into words. I'll try my utmost. But you didn't see poverty and the kind of abuses that we find locally. And then I told myself, so we can live off of our culture. But now I'm becoming more critical about it when I look at it, because now economy plays a role, education plays a role. So now how do I question these things? How do I bring those who, the policymakers, how do I bring them to the table in order to start putting certain conditions and terms and conditions in place as an artist? So the artist's voice needs to be heard more, and art is a service to the society, and it's often looked at as you're a hobbyist because you're painting and then you're selling your paintings, or you're making a song in your free time. And where if you take art away from society, how will people be able to express or reflect and be able to heal, like Arthur said? And so therefore I think art is a language of expression, because we need that shared knowledge in order to advance. I don't want to be too long-winded. There's more I can share, but I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
No. That's perfect. Like, we need you to be long-winded. That's the whole point of sort of like this conversation, right? But Marlene, I'd like to also like pose the question to you, just a bit about art. And I mean, you are the CEO of Artscape, so I'm sure you have a lot to sort of like unpack about this.
Before I'm the facilitator of Artscape. I'm very privileged to have worked with Jit's Finger, and for me, I was also an educationist and a community artist myself. And the role that arts plays in the community is so profound, because it is about the narratives that needs to change, the narratives that the artist brings to our society, and also to tell the untold stories and the truth, because that is our role as artists. And also to look at the unifying, because if you don't have role models, because our previous history, that's why I'm talking about co-create. I'm so happy that I'm part of this conversation, because when we talk about language as an identity, it is so important for us. Like, for instance, my language, my mother tongue is Afrikaans, and it was denied for me by saying that my Afrikaans was not the right Afrikaans, and the Afrikaans that Jit's finger is rapping is not the Afrikaans it's supposed to be. But the heritage of Afrikaans is not a white Dutch Afrikaans. The heritage of, you need to read the book of Ahmad David. You need to get the knowledge of where it comes from. So it's very important to look at education, the curriculum, the narratives, and that is where art and artists plays a vital role to create works, to tell the stories. For an example, the theatre that I'm now at was only built for white people. So it was important to work with artists to come to the stage, bring their work, like we've just had a work on Adam Small, for instance, and we're now having a work of Christmas from Jacobs, telling the real story of what is happening in our communities, the books of Adam Small and the poems of Adam Small, but also to tell for the young people that you had role models. You are having role models that shaped your past, but the narrative that was told to our ancestors, that the courtiers of the world, who was an iconic woman, was a drunkard. So we have an obligation to change that narrative. For an example, for our young people, for us to move forward. Then lastly, I want to say, to look at co-create, to look at a co-identity, to look at inclusion, we are also in a space that we are looking at new communities, new stories. We are not born with culture, we're not born with language, we are not born with religion. We are inculturated where we are born into. Now we're busy in co-creating new communities. And that is, if we said, well, the other speakers also said that, we need to look at our past, look at how do we bring that to the fore for our young generation that is there, but also the healing process of my parents, of my ancestors, that their real stories needs to be told, and not the stories of evil and that of people that didn't know their past. And that is a narrative, and I think Quintin, you will relate to that, that in our communities we have young people that say that I have no identity, I have no future, and it is our role to create that future and create a voice and the platforms where we are for them to say you have a voice. And a country that doesn't support the artists and culture is a country that will be without identity, that will be in years to come in war with itself.
Sure.
Sure. That was great, that was great. But Arthur, I wanna sort of like touching on what Marlene said, right, about identity, and I think specifically she spoke about the colored community. The Netherlands and South Africa sort of like have such a complex history of slavery, indentured laborers, and all of that, right? We know this, but how do we then foster a sense of belonging? Right. And again, just alluding to some of the points that Marlene highlighted.
Apologies, Alpha, you're on mute.
Arthur, you still on mute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Sorry about that. We had some internet connectivity issues, but I will not be silenced. So we will speak, although sometimes maybe the internet is withering. But I would like to say two things, and I totally underline what Marlene and Quintin is saying. But I do sometimes understand that people say, why do we need to look back to the past? Because we are dealing with our economic and political struggles of today. I say you cannot look to the future without addressing what happened in the past.
Yes.
So for me, looking to inclusion, you have to see who is at the table. In any table, you have to see the representation of women, of people who have been underrepresented in the past. That is directly connected with the past. I am the second generation of people, of Black people in the Caribbean who had access to education. It's only the second generation. So we are actually very much not represented at certain levels. It means you have to understand why people didn't have the education or the access. So we need to say first and foremost at every table, and I mean that in a metaphorical way, every table, we need to make sure that people are represented. And in order to have that representation, you need to deal with the past. You need to deal with why people were not at that table. And this is where slavery and apartheid and colonialism and also every other type of exclusion, whether it's patriarchy and other things, have to be discussed. It is not only let's say, philosophical debate. It is why do people live in the areas that they live? And why do people have access to the jobs or not? So for me, that is inclusion and belonging. First of all, we facilitate, and from a government perspective, I think we need to facilitate the space for other people to come in and take their rightful belonging with them. And in order to facilitate that space, you have to know what made people excluding. What has been the exclusion? Why some art spaces have been not accessible for people? So for me, belonging starts with seeing who is at the table, then claiming the seat at the table, and make sure that other people can come in also to participate fully. And then we will talk about belonging. For me, diversity is not only about celebrating the difference, it is also about acknowledging that everyone has a right to be. And we are far from that acknowledgement. But that acknowledgement goes with actually acknowledging your past. And I know that young people or sometimes older people have other things to worry about. But I say, without that necessary process, we cannot move to an inclusive society. We cannot move to the belonging because conflict will come back. Structures will persist. And it's not only the matter, the color of your skin. It is economic structures that we have to tackle. It is cultural structures that we have to tackle. And I believe that I've had excellent conversations with government officials that are dealing with social issues deeply ingrained right now in South Africa about women not having
the opportunity to raise their children, the violence, the gender-based violence in a society. And it's not only South African. It is very much at the heart of the Netherlands debate, whether we have to acknowledge slavery as part of the past so we can tackle racism. And that is a very present situation as we speak today, institutional racism. We all know about Black Lives Matter. We all know about the Me Too movement. So that they are directly linked to our past. And I think as a government, we are more and more aware that this type of institutional exclusion will also have to be tackled in order for people to belong and have this healthy and free societies. And this is where we come in. And this is where I think the attention for slavery is justified, although people think, why do we need research on archives, on where my foremothers and this and that? Yes, we need to know how that structure came about and why single led household by mothers had to survive and how resilient they were. All of that is linked to economic prosperity of the future. So my point is, slavery, apartheid, the attention for colonialism is not an elitist project. It is heart and parcel of the healing of a society. And if that healing doesn't take place, we are bound to get other issues, other diseases that will perpetuate in the society. So from our perspective, from a government perspective, we must facilitate a safe place for this conversation, meaning the artists, the intellectuals, the writers, everyone at the table to give the mirror of the society and say, this is where belonging should be. This is where all the people, this diversity means we need 50% of women at the table, or we need to make sure that we will get there in the coming years. We need it of people of color, we need it for LGBT plus community, we need it for all the underrepresented people at the table. This is, for me, diversity. Very practical and very important. Bold interventions to make sure we can get to belonging. And this is, I think, what the struggle of South Africa has been for. And I think you're still an inspiration for the world. We are looking at South Africa to deal with the demons of the past in order to have the bright future, not only for South Africa, also for the whole of Africa and actually for the world. You have world-class leaders who taught us what inclusion should be and who fought against apartheid and for democracy. I am here in deep respect. I went to the Tutu Legacy Foundations. I visited Robben Island, and I think we stand on that struggle for belonging.
Yeah. Arthur, sorry to catch you there, but I understand the main message, right, which is healing and acknowledging the past. And you're right, maybe in South Africa, we don't really want to do that because it's still it's still sore, right? It still hurts. Like, for example, my own parents lived through apartheid. So, and it's nothing they want to talk about, but I do sort of like agree with you that we need to have these conversations so we can move forward. So on to you now, Quintin, what are some of the opportunities for working together, regarding inclusion and fostering inclusion?
Thank you. Thank you also, Arthur, for speaking so passionately. And Marlene mentioned something very important with regards to the rural voice. Because when we talk about acknowledging, that's where opportunities now starts to take place, where we start seeing opportunities, because it's quite limiting at the moment, especially when people are spoken for. Now, let me give a rural example. You can't have the farm owner speak on behalf of those farm workers. Now, like saying these are the people and this is where they come from, which is what happens a lot. So the acknowledgement means to me that now you are acknowledging the narrative of those who are always been spoken for. It's those who are stereotyped in whether it be movies or stories for generations, right? Which led to a lot of generational trauma that's not being dealt with. So as I've seen it geographically, people are placed, through apartheid architecture to be kept away from certain resources. Like, why can't people from Bontas or Googs go to Kirstenbosch Gardens to heal because of the greenery? It's there for everyone, but the accessibility, is not so open and free for all as we might think, So opportunities lie in a more open society where industries start, what's the word I would love to use? Cross-pollinate, education that cross-pollinates with writers. And you have so many art forms that can be intersecting with the rest of the industry, and also acknowledging that art can then play a role in whatever industry, that we have out there in order to see a way forward together. Because, media has a role to play. If you think about this, writers can't really reach the readers if the writing can't stay as authentic as it should. Like certain media only allow a certain type of language, but the writer is more authentic. So when people in Pero or wherever reads their daily gospel, the moment the writing changes stylistically, it's looked at like, what is this, But it takes a while for the reader to now, understand and acknowledge the writer speaking for a community and for a certain thinking and consciousness that is still very much needed. Because I call my language Afrikaans, meaning I am now forcing, as I have to, my narrative of my identity and my heritage into the canon of language itself, which is so contested if you think about Afrikaans, right? It's a very controlled domain, where if we look at the mechanics, not much has changed, and the instrument is so stagnant that it left out a whole community that are artistic, that has a culture behind it. So you can't remove language from people. That's just how it is. But that still needs to find its space in order to then create opportunities. So for me, I see opportunities in language on a global scale. Like if Netherlands, those who speak Netherlands can speak to Afrikaans without having to choose a middle ground to understand each other and just speak their mother tongue to each other. Now the family through language can meet on a very raw, authentic, and romantic way. So for me, as an Afrikaans speaking artist who only performs in my mother tongue, I have enjoyed various opportunities like that globally because people are curious by nature. I've been to Chile where I did the same thing, and France where I had to ask, how do you say when I say, then you say in France, in order to get my message across? And the moment I did that, their hearts open up, their minds open up, their ears opened up to what it is that I have to say and more about where I'm from. So yes, that's where opportunities, I think, lie for me. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I'm so glad you actually touched on the language aspect, right? Because we know language is it's a very contentious issue, especially in South Africa. But Marlene, I think I want to ask you the same question, and I'm very keen to hear about the rural perspective of it in terms of opportunities for working together, fostering inclusion.
I think I first want to say also, I'm also the chairperson of Chrysalis Academy, which was very important for me with the transition from apartheid and also to understand our enslavement, because we're still very much enslaved on so many aspects. It was to bring young people together from the different geographical areas, because we must understand, and I think you understand this, but just for our other when we're broadcasting this, it's again is that if you're poor and you of color or black, you are still trapped in the geographical areas of the apartheid. If you have a little bit of money, you are venturing out in these so-called higher class, white areas. And it's something that we must come to understand. And that is the basis where our school system is also modeled on. That's why I mentioned to you, I was also in the education as per se. So important for us is also to bring our young people together, to come to understand each other, to share each other's identities, and also to move towards a South African identity. And I want to say to Arthur, I fully agree. We need to understand our past in order to move forward, in order to find common ground as well. But when it comes to the rural perspective, it is also, I want to say, and I can only speak for myself, I come from a background of farm workers, where we didn't own land, where we come from the dopstelsel. When you are worked on the land, you've been paid by very, very a deep-rooted system by liquor, by wine. That is why I'm always traumatized. People go to wine farms and say, wonderful wine tasting. I am traumatized. I know what it is to work on a farm. I know what it is to be discriminated against. I know what it is to feel and taste poverty in my disability. So my work is not just being at a theatre, is using the space and my privilege that I have now in order to look back and to see what economic empowerment must be there for that young child. If I come to a woman, a young girl, to have access to education, who have a disability, how can we as a nation assist, but also to understand where we come from, because I'm a descendant of Eva Kretua. So why am I bringing this into this? Is when the Folks Opera House came to present Kretua to me in my position as Artscape, I said to the Folks Opera House, go home. You can't be the director of Kretua. You can't come and give me a script of Kretua. You're not going to tell my story again through the eyes of the Dutch. And because of that, we could put Kretua in a different format. Because I could work, I could say to them, we need to reach a compromise. Basil Apollos used to direct, and Sylvia Vollenhoven should rewrite with you the script so that we can have a compromise in a sense. But very important, coming to the rural, it is important that the rural women must have a voice at the table where we're talking about identity, when we're talking about empowerment, where we're talking about jobs, where we're talking about identity, and where we talk about who are we. The time that other people needs to speak for us, it is over. And that is what we need to come to understand. And I think this is where the conversations are starting to move of belonging. I can't speak for anybody else than if I don't have the understanding and walking in this and have walked more or less the same path than that person. Then it will be second-hand information. Coming to the Netherlands, it is very important that they still have the conversation of Zwarte Piet. Let us just be clear and to the point of that we need to own up about the enslavement of our history before we can talk about shared identity and co-create identity.
Yeah,
Arthur, is
that's
there something you want to add? I'm hearing a lot of people agreeing to this, and I would hate to sort of like you not have your voices heard. So before I move to my follow-up questions, if there's anything both of you want to add to that, please you're welcome to. I think Arthur is muted.
oh, there you go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me
Yes.
now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't figure out the system still, but I would like to completely underline what Marlene has said on owning up to your own history. I totally agree. But I also think that sometimes confrontations are helpful. And in this sense, I think that you speaking out on a collaboration and a way that is the process that we need to embrace. I totally agree with your comments on Black Pete, which has been for my whole life an issue where the Dutch society is still grappling with. We are moving, not as fast as I want, but we are embracing it. But I do think it is sometimes confrontations that help our society to grow and to heal. And my point is, your intervention for me reminds me of the need for decolonizing our mind and the way and our relationships. And that's on every level taking place. That's not only in a bilateral between countries, that's also in institutions. We have big institutions in the Netherlands really rethinking the teams that they are working with, the way that they are looking at the Dutch history right now. It is very much ongoing. But I believe sometimes we need interventions from outside in order to mirror what has to be addressed. We need South Africa to tell us about apartheid and how it was very much ingrained in the Dutch thinking and universities and policies and stuff. I mean, apartheid was definitely made famous by South Africa, but I come from the Caribbean and there was everything except the word apartheid has been implemented in the Caribbean. And we need, I think, the collaboration and also the confrontations to show what was so common. I walk through Cape Town and I see the Dutch past, which was for me part of the Curacao experience. Right? So there are links and collaborations to be forged. But I think that we need each other to be sharp and also to heal. And I want to stress this, especially for people who went to trauma, generations of trauma. I see one problem that I have to speak out, that we as people, Black people, people of color, have to accept that there was a level of trauma that we need to heal from. And otherwise, we can inflict the same pain to others. Otherwise, we will repeat the cycle. And my point is not to point out that we are better or that one is worse or whatever. It is to come to a common sense of belonging, because I cannot stand Black people doing to each other what we have seen happening in the past. And my point is, let's take that very seriously, because that level of trauma needs special interventions. And I agree with economic empowerment, but it's not only economic. It is also collective psychology. And it is also addressing the pain of not being seen and heard that cause addiction, and that cause us to, and it includes everyone, white and black, because the system is brutal when it comes to exclusion. So it goes beyond, I think, color. But I do agree that issues like Black Pete, racist ideologies, and exclusion have to be tackled head on. And we need you also, and I am empowered by the conversations with people from South Africa. I said, how could it be that Black Pete is still exists in the Netherlands? And I said, yes, but we need you, honestly, to explain also what that means. Because in our society, it is a very deep wound. Anyway, my point is healing goes together with other interventions, and especially we have to be bold enough to say where we are hurting so we cannot inflict the hurt on others. Back to you, Anati.
Thank you so much. Quintin, I just want to follow up. Did you have something to say? Okay, it looks like you did.
And I don't mean to laugh like that, but I do agree fully with what you said, Arthur. There's a rethink needed, a huge one, because if I look at, where can I start now with what you said? The policy making, of this country, it's so weird because let's look at the creative economy, huge potential, but very undermined by what we've been given in order to produce. Like Netflix has leveled the playing field in terms of the film industry, right? Because the doorway, the gatekeeping that's going on in this country is so hectic. Music, film, and so on. And where do these production companies go? They look at non-white actors who are immensely talented, but they will take the job because they need it. They need a shot. So it's never in the hands of the those who have the talent, then they can groom it, that gets these opportunities, in order to put films out and so on. So there's constant conflict, and language for me is so important because it allows for one to speak, give your opinion, and it allows also for when you have to speak from a language that's been appropriated for so long. It's still weird for a lot of us to hear someone being very confident in their own language. Like some of the youth can't even apply for jobs speaking their own language because they are easily stereotyped as you're not intelligent. Yeah, you're probably a gangster and so on. So that still prevails in this country, And so, having a seat at the table, thank you. Yeah, we have a seat at the table, and I'm so thankful for Co-Create and for Mail and Guardian for this opportunity. But this cannot be the only spaces where we have these conversations. I just want to say that in closing. Thank you so much.
I definitely agree with that. And before we close, actually, there's an interesting comment by Benedict Kumalo in the chat box. He's saying that belonging is such a complex issue, it has been politicized. And I'm not sure if I agree or don't agree with that. But the last question I think I have for any of my panelists is that we always talk about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and all of that, but we never go beyond it, right? And I guess the question now, and the final question is, how do we get beyond the inclusion and the diversity? What is beyond? I think I'm posing this to Marlene.
For me, education is so important, and it's not tertiary education. It is about to make our schools inclusive from primary school, from our basic schools, where the diversity needs to be there. And it's about also mother tongue, indigenous mother tongues are so important that we start to have interactive, inclusive communities in order that it is not just so superficial that only at the workplace and on a tertiary level we start to talk about inclusion. The tick box, and I believe in the tick box, don't take me wrong, we need, that is why representativity is not just going to happen overnight. You need to have a mindset and you need to apply that actively and to say, are we inclusive in our practices wherever we are in order for us to move forward? If that is not happening, if we are still saying to our parents that your child can't be in this school because you're not from that area, or if we are not empowering and equipping our most rural schools with the best resources and equity in order for us to understand ourselves as a country, our identity, our diversity, and have really the arts and culture being practiced in our schools properly with skilled teachers and also the discipline of an arts teacher who is skilled, we are going to lose the plot. And we're only going to concentrate on inclusiveness and belonging on a higher level. That's my take on this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Arthur, what are your parting words? What is beyond diversity?
Beyond diversity is justice. For me, it all begins and ends with justice. When we have justice for all, we are what I call belonging. And I would think it starts with asking every day the question, what can I do in terms of making this a better and just world? So we need to reflect. We need everyone to play its part. It's not government, it's not the artist, it's not only the activist, it is everyone every day asking your intentions of working to that just society. Who is at the table? Like Marlene said, representation matters. I think we have a long way to go, but it's on the agenda. There is no way we can accept that women are not at the table. There's no way we can accept that underrepresented groups don't have a voice in the political system. But there is an everyday task for every one of us to see where we need to change. It's not about the other, it is about us. What do we have to do to untackle our decolonization? How do we unpack the narratives that were given to us, good and bad? So I think it takes a village, and I think South Africa has shown us I learned about South Africa what institutional racism, before it was a word, what it was. And that happened because people analyzed and attacked and reflected on what apartheid might be gone, but institutional racism is very much at the center still of our societies. And we need to reflect on that. Ask yourself what it means to have a more just world every day. Reflect upon that in the institution, the organization, the business, in whatever enterprise you're working at, and then make bold interventions. We are not going to get there only with small steps. We need bold interventions to make everyone welcome at the table. That would be my hope for belonging and for a better future for all of us. Thank you, Anati.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Quintin, I don't want to leave you behind. I know you already said your parting words, but if there's anything you want to add in terms of what do you see, what's beyond inclusivity, rather? I mean, Arthur did say that for him it's justice, but what is it for you?
Well, I can't put a word to it, but I do believe the future is speaking to us. It's such a good time to live in, It's for me, it's a sensational situation where I'm in being an artist, because yes, I'm dealing with the past through my elders was still here, still sharing what hasn't been shared in the past, like new reflections on the past. It's so mind opening, and see how they transforming. And then I have the future speaking to the new technology and seeing how they are developing at such a rapid pace. But are we listening to them? Because they are speaking very loud and clear to what they need, right? They need assistance. It's still a foundational thing, I think, like where our value systems are, how we treat each other, because they will take that with them, in creating their next generation after them. So I don't know how to put that in words, but yes, justice is also in there. The education that needs to play a role, rethinking, education especially, because being an artist, I can now go to schools, I can influence the curriculum for life orientation through creative writing, so that the youth can use art in order to speak to their aspirations, and express themselves. The need to express will be with us for as long as humanity is going to continue its existence, But that, for me, I think, is when we have moved beyond this exclusive society. And just another point I wanted to make earlier. The problem I find with society is when people speak from, and when let's include myself, speak from a position of privilege, not to understand when you other someone and say that, I don't need to understand you, yet we are in the same society. That I find is still something we need to also address. And art is right there, where we get to perform and break the conventions of high art. Like, let's take hip hop as an art form, right? You have dancers. Can you have a ballet dancer with someone that pops and locks and does these new contemporary moves on the same platform? It's going to do something to the audience. Developing these audiences means you're bringing different parts of our society under the same roof. So we need our artscapes to reflect transformation. We need our policymakers to reflect new ways of mobility, because access to resources is like partly why apartheid was designed. It's like, who has the resources? And thanks to the likes and the thinkers like Arthur, who can influence those policies so that we have a more just society that can now innovate into a more prosperous future.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's it from us. Let me thank you all for being part of this wonderful conversation. I mean, we had Arthur, who is a government official, sitting with us and sort of like giving us high level opinions. And I mean, we have an artist with us as well, and as well as an intellectual and an academic. But the topics that were spoken about here today are quite critical issues. And, owning your own history, I think that's something Marlene said, and it sort of like stuck with me, and the pain that Arthur referred to of not being seen. These are things that we still need to unpack as South Africans and talk about, so that we can also move to that space of belonging. But let me sorry, I'm sure our audience sort of like has a lot to chew on. The conversation continues on Twitter and Instagram at Co-Create SANL. Marlene, Arthur, and Quintin, thank you so much for joining us. And this is where I leave you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Arthur. Thank you to Jetsfinger. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Marlene, Quintin. To be continued, please.
To be continued. These conversations
need to
go forward.
And thank you for the comments as well. Thank you for the comments as well. I read as I was responding, so I hope I
Yes.
spoke to those, yeah. The Rolene Yankees, Praviana, Naidu, everyone, Mad Stoltz, thank you so much as well.
And thank you for all the committed activists here in the conversation. I really was a pleasure for me joining you, and a big honor. Be good and stay safe.
Be safe and let's be inclusive, and let's the other pandemic of gender-based violence, let's this tackle together as a nation, as humanitarian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Also, Quintin, I've been seeing your hoodie. I love it with your name there. Show everyone.
How do we get one, Quintin? How do we get one now?
So that we can support.
Thank you for asking. I have a limited stock here with me, actually. So, yeah, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just DM me and I will send you the purchase details. And it's also on my website, www.zutsvinger.co.za. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Coming up. Thank you.
Winter is coming. You'll get your hoodie. Winter is coming.
Thank you, Anati, for moderating fantastically.
Thank you, Nat.